introduce to you the man of the hour,
Tony.
Hello and welcome back to Atta the Gatesa. I, Tony.
It's the worst pig Latin attempt ever.
I, Tony. You.
Jared.
He, Jared. And you?
Who am I? Any guesses? Who came for the first time?
Congratulations, buddy.
It's a big accomplishment.
Were you solo or with a friend?
It was I had a co-pilot.
Okay. And?
Hi, I'm Nate Doppler. I'm yet to hit puberty.
That's probably true. So we're here talking about baseball or basketball. The best baseball movie ever made, correct, Jared? Basketball?
I disagree.
Greatest baseball movie ever made.
The Little League.
How about you?
The Sandlot.
How about you?
Tony hates all baseball movies except for...
Basketball is the best movie. Come on. Everyone's wrong. But really what we're going to talk about is...
can't get over the fact that they're Disney movies.
Jared's complaining now because he's a Disney man, and I offended him by saying all the baseball movies are Disney-fied.
It's not for Tony.
So what we're going to do is talk about a little bit about the Twins draft, and then maybe issues about the draft, as well as cover the importance of different positions, and if you're building a team, what makes sense as a GM to kind of go after in position order. So, Jared, lead us off. What did you think of the Twins draft?
I think it's fine. I mean, in my opinion, when it comes to a draft, especially when you have the first handful of picks, you generally just end up picking the best guy or the best handful of guys overall. Obviously, the Major League Baseball draft works a little bit differently. So they picked a guy who seems to have a lot of athleticism, skills in a couple positions, one of which we have a need for, even though they said they're going to draft him as a shortstop, and it seems like he's going to end up as a center fielder. But for the most part, you don't know how any of these guys are going to turn out, so you just fill the spots that you think you have a need for and hope your teams develop them in the minors. So
I do agree with that assessment. It's way too early to actually get super critical on them. The one thing that I think a lot of people are critical about is the manner of which they approach the draft is very similar to Terry Ryan, which is going to be very conservative and based on money and filling those holes, but not filling those holes with pitching, which is strange because if there's one thing that the Twins have needed for basically a couple decades now, it's pitching. To add an insult to injury, the two that were most hyped, one of those being Hunter Green, not only was he hyped about as a pitcher, but he was hyped as being the best two-way pitcher position player, and something that they've never seen before. That's what's really frustrating, because the Twins, if they would have drafted someone like Hunter Green, would have had the upside of, like you said, multiple positions, but one of those being a very key position that they need, and that's a pitcher, and he can throw 102 miles an hour. So
the hype doesn't mean anything.
It's not hype. He actually pitches that fast.
That's fine.
And hearing when you said it's about drafting the best potential, not even potential, but the best players on the board, it was agreed that these two pitchers were actually better players and better baseball players, better potential than this guy that we drafted.
How many Ryan Leafs do we have to have in drafts before people start?
Ryan Leaf was football, though.
Exactly. The application still holds that doesn't matter what sport you're in, the skill level is there, and between the different drafts, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, you don't know how they're going to turn out. So we can get pissed as fans, and that's just the hype around it. That's the hype that I'm saying. It doesn't matter. Hype doesn't matter.
Correct. And this is also a business. So part of the hype behind Hunter Green was that he is an African-American player, and this would be really good for his type of people, getting them back into the sport.
Who are you calling his type of people? Jeez, you had the angle.
And there he is.
Don't worry, we'll be
we got
fine.
one on the board. So, I think that we could debate this. There's not going to be a winning argument. There's not going to be a winning argument on this. But knowing the marketing that's able to be done with Hunter Green right away, rather than the shortstop that we drafted, the Twins could start making money on this kid, and it's all about money. And unfortunately, I think that's what...
where the hype comes into play as a bonus for teams.
But that's the other part that I have an issue with the Twins, is that part of this deal was based on money, and that is the saving of it. It's not necessarily that he was the best player on the board. It was that he was a good player, but would come to them at the lowest amount of money compared to these pitchers. That shouldn't be the case, and that kind of goes into the flaws that I'm going to talk about here for the draft itself. When it comes to the Major League Draft, it sucks because it's not about drafting the best potential player. It's about drafting a good player at a good price, because you have to save some of that money for later on. And if we're caring about some of these teams that have struggled, and if you start to have number one overall draft picks multiple years in a row, it would make more sense to allow them to draft the best possible players rather than draft based on money. Would it not?
Drafting based on money is dumb to me in the first place. I haven't heard a good logical argument for why that makes sense. If somebody has one, please tweet at me. I'll be willing to listen, but for now it doesn't make any sense to me at all to do it that way.
I don't think the Twins management system is going to email you or tweet at you. I'm sorry.
Well, it's worth a shot. You never
They are definitely the ones that would have an argument and logic behind it.
Yeah, I don't really care.
So, how would you fix the draft? One of the things that I thought right away is, baseball you don't declare for the draft, other sports you do, and in the NHL, if you get drafted, your rights are owned by that team, basically until you reach the pros or until you are traded. Is that maybe something that you'd want implemented, or how would you fix the MLB draft?
I think that makes sense, just from a standpoint of you have players who, like we talked about offline, how players can say, oh, I want to go in, and then they're like, no, I'm going to go back to college, and then they can try to be like force teams' hands and or back out of deals and go somewhere else. And I think the controlling stake of being drafted out as early as out of high school and have that controlling stake until they can get to the point where they're ready to move up to the pro ranks makes a lot of sense for sure. And like you said before, primarily just if you're the worst team in the league, you should have first dibs at the best players in next year's draft, period.
And maybe it would be something where not all of them you control their rights, because I mean baseball has more than 30 rounds, so maybe it's the top 5 rounds that you get protected rights on, and anyone that you draft in the first 5 rounds becomes your basically property, and you own their rights until they actually reach the professional level. I think that's one way of correcting it. Or like I said before, treat it like basketball, treat it like football, where you have to actually declare and say, this, I intend on playing pro, I'm giving up college, I'm giving up any other type of avenue, and I am going into the Major League Baseball.
Even basketball's wishy-washy though too, because they have a sort of a grace period where they can say, oh, I'm going to try it out, I'm going to go to the pre-draft camps and all that kind of stuff, and then if I feel like my position's not good enough, I'm going to go back and continue in college.
But they don't actually get drafted and then back out.
Right, yeah.
And I think that's where I have the biggest issue with baseball, because you're basically drafting these kids that for the most part are high schoolers, and they often have the ability to go play college, which is going to be for free because they have a scholarship, or they can play a different sport like football, basketball. We've seen numerous multi-sport athletes that don't even stick with baseball that get drafted. Russell Wilson comes to mind. He's someone that got drafted somewhat high up. Just all these options. It'd be nice for Major League Baseball to kind of shut it down and even combine the international draft with the regular draft, because we shouldn't be treating these kids to separate rules where you can draft a 16-year-old out of the Dominican, but you have to wait until they're 18 here in the U.S. It seems ludicrous, and to keep those kind of draft pool money, like those pools separate, just gets confusing for fans, for teams, for those involved. To treat them as separate entities, just I'm not trying to say that it's going to be racial, but the separate but equal kind of feels true to that, because we have like our American boys and then we have the rest, and that's a little bit strange. Anything else that you have to add for draft stuff?
Not really. I think the simpler the better. It's too convoluted as it is.
Agreed. And if you were drafting, you had a good question for me. You asked me, was it yesterday? Basically, what positions do I think are the most important?
Yes, the question was, after a lengthy discussion about the draft, the question was, if you could put in order the positions on the field from most important to least important, what would your order be?
I did that. There are some positions that I will admit right away I didn't quite factor in because they're kind of wishy-washy and can kind of be slotted in different areas depending on the team, and that is the closer, the bullpen, and the number 3 pitcher. But I'm going to rate the 1 and 2 pitchers as well as every other position on the field. And I'll start with the bottom, and I think that is your corner outfield spots. Right field might be a little bit more important because that's where you can kind of hide a powerful bat.
And you can steal a few outs in
Correct.
A game here and there.
Kind of like Eddie Rosario. Yeah. I mean, he's got a powerful arm. You can kind of play around with one of those guys that is a potential center fielder, but you have a good center fielder, and you can kind of hide that power on one of the corners. Then moving on after that, I think it's your second baseman. Shortstop will always get all the love. Having a good duo, though, between short and second would be the best. I think we've seen that come to fruition here in Houston because they have probably the youngest and best duo between Correa and Altuve. And look at where they are at now. And you can even argue that their pitching isn't really that solid. So, again, probably comes down to that middle infield and their ability to hit as well as field. Then after that, I think it comes to your third baseman. We have that luxury of having a powerful bat at third base now. That's going to be kind of historically, at least in the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, that's where you can kind of hide that aging shortstop or that shortstop that got too big with a very powerful bat. Miguel Sano fits that mold. For a while, Miguel Cabrera. After that, it is your catcher. You could probably argue that it should be a little bit higher, but depending on your pitching staff, if you actually have a really good pitching staff, he's not going to have as much impact as you would think. But a smart catcher that has a little bit of a semblance of a bat is at a premium these days. It'd be nice to have Joe Mauer back as a actual catcher, putting up the numbers that he did, because we would be looking quite good. Then at the 1, 2, 3, 4, this is the top 5 now. Number 5, I have the first baseman. Again, power. If you're lucky, you can have someone like Eric Hosmer, who is also really good at fielding and can kind of be your backup captain of the infield. Then you're going to have your center fielder. He's going to be your captain of your outfield. A good one like Griffey, where you have power and speed, will take you far. Will probably make you a playoff team. You look at the best teams, and they all have a really good center fielder, and that's not by accident. Above that, at the number 3 position, I have the number 2 pitcher on your staff. If you want to make it deep in the playoffs, you basically have to have 2 top pitching performers. You could even argue that you probably need a number 3 pitcher, but like Jared and I were talking here on the way, you can kind of parts it for your 3 and 4 spot. Most guys, when you reach the playoff, don't even have a 4-man rotation. It's almost like a glorified 3-man rotation. So you can kind of put together you don't even need a guy to go that deep in your number 3 for the playoffs. You just need a guy that can go 3 innings, another guy that go 3 innings, and then use your bullpen again. So number 2 pitcher. Second spot is your shortstop. We haven't had that here with the Twins, and you can kind of tell that we haven't been doing so well. Then number 1 is your ace pitcher. If you can have an ace, which we haven't had, you can make it deep in the playoffs. That's what we were missing in 2010. We didn't go deep. We lost to the Yankees. If we would have had a stopper that could have stolen that first game, it really moves the momentum. And is there anything that you disagree with?
Let me look at your list here. There was a couple. You took it a little bit farther and broke down the what I was thinking was more of just your on-field 9, not extending to
pitchers,
to the 5-man rotation to the bullpen kind of thing. For the most part, I agree with a lot of the stuff that you said. I might shift 1 or 2 up and down like one spot. I'd probably move catcher up a little bit just because, and I would, like I said, I was thinking your standard 9, not extending. And so I would put the pitcher higher. Ace, I would combine the ace and the number 2 pitcher and put them at the top. And then have your catcher probably up maybe 1 or 2 spots, just because of the fact that I feel like, your catcher's for the most part calling the game, and he's got to have a good understanding of everybody in the lineup. Like, he essentially, as much as I like to think this is the case, other people may disagree, but I think the catcher is essentially the quarterback on the field. He's calling all the plays, basically. So that's a pretty important position to me. But other than that, that's pretty much it. I'm pretty on board with the order that you have set there.
Cool. Well, I think what we're going to do is we have 5 minutes here, so we will stop. We will probably record a little bit once we're inside, talk about BP, talk about other random things that come to mind. So be prepared to hear our voices after this non-existent break. And this is just Tony, post-game. Ended up with 14, 2 touchdowns, 1 short of my target field high and record. Not too bad, especially because I also got a pair of Jason Castro batting gloves, thanks to the Bat Boy. So, not a bad night at all. Unfortunately, the Twins fell 6-4, but they did show a little bit of fight, especially going down 5-0 right away in the first 3 innings. Overall, like I said, not a bad night at the ballpark, and looking forward to doing it again on Sunday. Sunday should be interesting because there's no batting practice, obviously, and it's going to be Father's Day. So we'll see what that brings. I don't know that there's going to be a lot of people. Ticket prices are pretty low right now. But they are going to use those special Father's Day balls, the light blue laces. So hopefully I can get my hands on a couple of those. Other than that, I think I will leave you with silence for just a little bit. Just clear your head. Take this time. Ignore the honking in the background. Ignore the car alarm. Ignore other sounds that you might hear. Just let the white noise take you over.